Welcome everybody to the Substack, the Corasomi Substack channel, and we have a fresh interview or conversation, as I like to call them, or authentic dialogue with a very eminent gentleman who is called Jeffrey Wilkinson, an American Jew living in Guelph, Ontario, and with the doctorate in education from the University of Toronto, and very much involved among other things, in Palestinian-Jewish dialogue and the peace process, this very uh, intense world issue, which has been around for a long time and has certainly been heating up lately since October 7th, and now with the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so, just one more little thing. There's a book that has been written called The Wall Between, I believe, is it? Uh, the Wall Between, yes, there we go, right. The Wall Between, What Palestinians and Jews Don't Want to Know About Each Other. Wonderful title. And this afternoon, actually, a bit later, I'll be interviewing your colleague, Raja Houri. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get you at the same time today, but welcome, Jeffrey. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and I'm very much looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise. So before we jump right into the leitmotif just mentioned, I'm a bit curious, going beyond that issue. I mean, you're more than just that, as we all
Right.
are. I'm interested, being a lover of music, and also I studied peace and conflict studies at university. I
Uh,
went back as an adult student at U of T.
wow.
And so you have a doctorate in education and you want to be
Right.
able to teach in the universities here in Canada.
Right.
And you are a composer, a
I
musician,
am. I am.
really. Can you tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, my sort of access to the world is through music. I'm a violist by training.
Oh,
We no viola jokes today, please. Um, and I've been I taught public school music for close to 30 years. I'm a composer, a performer, teach musicology courses on music history, theory, analysis, etc. So I have a very sort of classical training, but I'm very interested in all forms of music and sound. As a Jew, I've been quite involved in klezmer, which is sort of
yeah.
a form of Jewish folk music. I've written music for liturgical purposes, for reflection, for lots of different reasons. Um, so probably the first word is how did you get from music to this? And the short answer is that um, during my career as a teacher, I became very engaged and interested in human rights work and became an equity officer for a major school board in Ontario and trained teachers and students in equity practices. And through that, got really curious about the larger piece of the world, my own Jewish heritage, my grandparents' experience in the Holocaust, and trying to connect these sort of dots. And so in 2007, I started my master's at York. Um, I was really interested in how to sort of connect these worlds. So I wrote a thesis, which was in part a set of original compositions on my grandparents' experience in the Shoah, my experience as an educator, my other experiences, all through music in a process called autoethnography through music. And a couple of years later, in 2012, I landed at Boise U of T and assumed that I would just extend this sort of study of memory, trauma, family experience to my doctorate and became so immersed in how we have come not to know each other, how our traumas have kept us apart, why this crazy little thing called the brain seems to bifurcate in such powerful ways to prevent any understanding of difference, particularly after it is traumatized. And so I interviewed a group of Jews and Palestinians living in Toronto and had them hear each other's traumas. And so the music piece, a sort of operetta that was supposed to come out of that, just never happened because I became so engaged in the research and the understanding. Through that, I met my co-author and dear friend, Raj Al-Khoury. And after it was over, I went back to him and decided that we needed to do something together, which became this book, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about, was launched 4 days before October 7th, 2023. And the last 2 years have been a complete, utter whirlwind. We have been across Canada and some of the US, many, many different universities, media organizations, governmental, non-governmental groups, trying to talk about why we can't talk about it.
Hmm.
Doing healing circles, engaging with Jews and Palestinians, students, faculty, news broadcasters, administrators who found the workplace changing because this giant conversation was all of a sudden an elephant in the room and they didn't know how to work through it. And so that's kind of what we've been doing and are continuing to do. And so there's the short story.
That's well, that contains a lot of information.
Right.
Um, well, I love the way that you yourself, the Jewish people are so multicultural, really,
Yeah.
through history, with mixing with various peoples and so on. And then your interest in musicology and cross-semination of different
Mhm.
musical styles and so on.
Right.
And I myself studied classical piano, and all
Mm.
along with that, did my ARCT, and then also have a deep interest in jazz and flamenco. I'm a flamenco fanatic.
Wow.
And actually,
Wow.
flamenco is an art form like jazz, which is very improvisational and
It is.
cross-cultural because in its origins, it contains the Sephardic Jewish music of southern Spain and so on, North Africa, and it was during the Islamic control of the Andalusian Peninsula, of course, that so there's a lot of Arabic sounds and then the local Spanish folklore. So wonderful that through music and education
Right.
comes this desire, this passion, along with Raja, to create a safe space, a safe enough space
Right.
for people to hear those parts of the conversation that are so difficult or paralyzed, and also to find their own voice, perhaps,
Right.
to speak truth and to ask questions that may be uncomfortable at first for many. So
Mhm.
it's a really like an idea whose time has come, and a whirlwind, you say. So it's sort of a confirmation, right, that there is such a receptivity to the message that you have and the book has to look at this situation, which is almost archetypal. I
Right.
remember as a kid, 14 years old, I'd read the newspaper every day. And even at that age, I was fascinated with the Holy Land, the Middle East, but in particular Israel and Palestine and the conflict there and the culture. And until this very day, it's in the newspapers every day. So it's more than just a little regional conflict. For me, it seems to really
Right.
indicate a universal conflict that we have on this planet in the
Right.
consciousness of humanity. And as a therapist, a psychotherapist, within our own individual psyche and
Right.
family and communities, that we can extrapolate from within to see what's happening outside, to understand it more, and vice versa.
Right.
So, could you talk a bit more about that voice and the message, the
Sure.
conversation that you're eking out through your book and your
Sure.
public
Sure.
appearances and so on? Yeah.
Well, I think it's extremely important to be able to start with not the assumption that it's difficult, but to understand where the difficulty comes from. So, in other words, for example, Israel-Palestine itself as a broader conversation is considered an intractable conflict. And what we mean by that, first of all, conflict is sort of this word that describes two groups that cannot mediate. They cannot work together.
Yeah.
And intractable means that there are root problems that are unsolvable. And the first sort of realization I want to say to your audience is neither of these things are true. Um, Israel-Palestine is very complicated, but it isn't a typical conflict
Mm.
because you don't have two warring armies. You, you have a nuclear power with tremendous arms and military backed by the most powerful military in the world.
Right.
And you have a militant group, as awful as Hamas is, they are not an army. They are not a nation state. They are not, um, they don't have the power and community to fight a war in the way other nations would. So the word conflict, particularly for many Palestinians, is quite troubling because it sort of masks the huge power difference that exists. Second part is intractability assumes that there are some issues that you're just not going to be able to work out. And it is a conflict over land and narrative that is shareable and listenable. We just have so far not been able to do so. So even words, for instance, that I like to complicate a lot are peace. So for many people, the word peace is sort of a Western idea of getting rid of obstacles that make our life more difficult. It's not actually about creating justice or
Hmm.
creating a space where all humans live together in safety and security. It is more of an idea about how do we solve something that's getting in the way of how we would like to live our lives. So we often say one of the reasons that various peace challenges or attempts have always failed is because we don't have reliable brokers. The United States and the West in general has their own interest and therefore is not necessarily the proper voice or the proper connection. It has at times served as a mediation force, and it can do that. But for long-term resolution of actually justice in the land, it's unlikely that the US is going to be a trusted arbiter.
Right.
So those are a few ideas I kind of want to just kind of filter. And rather than keep talking, why don't you ask me something else and we'll go a little
Sure.
deeper
Well,
in the
go ahead. Yeah.
conversation.
Sure. Well, yeah, that inequality that you mentioned, it's nuclear weapons versus slingshots, uh, almost David and Goliath,
Oh,
and
a
Palestine
little
is the
more, unfortunately, lots more than slingshots, but I know what you mean.
nowadays. Yeah, there are a few
Yeah,
missiles that are sent, but I remember back
yeah,
20 years ago, it was like
sure.
10-year-old boys with slingshot. The
But
West Bank.
certainly that is, sorry to interrupt, but certainly the first
Oh,
intifada was rock throwing
yeah.
primarily. From the second intifada forward, it became much more violent, became bombings,
Yes.
machine gun attacks.
Yes.
So we always want to be really clear that why it may appear that we talk more about the Palestinian experience because it's less known, we're not assigning blame to one side or the other. We're not saying these are good guys and these are bad guys. That's what's got us in the mess in the first place. There is lots of accountability on both sides. The difference that we push is that only Israel has the power to change it. The narrative in the general sort of mainstream news is that if Hamas would just lay down his weapons and give back the hostages, everything would be fine. And that's just illogical nonsense because it doesn't solve the root problems that created Hamas in the first place.
Mhm.
It might sound good to us, but it isn't a practical solution.
Mhm. So I have a question. The inequality on the ground, territory-wise,
Right.
weapons-wise, and so on. And I'm wondering if you have experience, and you have a lot more experience than myself, of course, in those meetings that you have either hosted or facilitated or been
Right.
invited to,
Sure.
where we'll say both Arabs and Jews or Palestinians and Israelis are
Right.
invited to sit down together and
Yes.
dialogue.
Yeah.
Have you found also that there is some kind of an inequality in that venue as well?
Super powerful question. And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Not ubiquitously, but this difference in power causes a few challenges. One is to get Palestinians to be actually willing to sit at the table
Right. Yeah.
because there already is an assumption that their voice will be less heard, less valued. So that's the first problem with
Yeah.
difference in power. The second problem is that, I can certainly say, as a Jew and as a member, a passionate member of the Jewish community, that we have learned over a long period of time to come even to dialogue from a place of victimhood, from a place of our 2,000-year traumatic history. It's also very painful but difficult to overstate the absolutely revolutionary impact of October 7th, 2023 on my community. I certainly hear Palestinians and their supporters who I empathize deeply with say, why are you keep talking about October 7th? It's
Yeah.
now 2 years ago. It's now 70,000 dead plus in Gaza. Why are And the reason Jews can't move past October 7th, in my view, is because it's a confirmation of everything we thought about ourselves, that we were victims, are victims, and will always be victims,
Mhm.
that our safety and security is a permanent threat. And because of that, it's very difficult to allow the brain the necessary bifurcation to hold our trauma and to include Palestinian trauma at the same time. Because our energies, in a sense, if you think of us as sort of like a car engine, all of our electricity or gasoline is going to our survival,
Right.
and we
Yeah.
have none left over to be able to care about the survival of others.
Right.
And that what is really what causes intractability in our conversation over here. Because the truth is, we must have space for the other's trauma. We must. Um, Many very, very well-meaning and caring Jews enter into dialogue in part to kind of explain Jewish trauma to Palestinians. And if you can imagine feeling that you have no power and that your group is, living under occupation and all the other horrors, um, there is a limit sometimes to the tolerance of hearing about Jewish trauma because it becomes sort of a message of excuse. And the Palestinian story is really just many Palestinians who really enter into deep conversation are horrified at learning about what Jews have experienced. Like it's not part of their narrative. Raja will tell you this in his interview.
Right.
Hadn't known about it, hadn't heard about it, so they're horrified.
Yes.
And then somehow they come to a place where feeling deep empathy says, but we didn't do this to you. Why are we paying the price for what happened to you? And that's a question I think my community has been unable to deal with, which is the reality that we are both victims and victimizers,
Yeah.
that our brain cannot handle this duality. And so what do? We entrench further into our victimhood, which pushes us farther away, allows our quite, you know, loud organizations to be able to push a narrative that Jews are the real victims, that anti-Semitism is the only problem. And this, of course, further isolates and marginalizes Palestinians because they feel that not only have they have had this long history of oppression at the hands of Israelis, but they're now being oppressed for talking about their oppression, which becomes really like a layer of oppression that is very difficult for Palestinians to deal with. So I think what I'm saying in this, sort of long answer is I invite the Jewish community to be able to hear the Palestinian story as something separate from its threat to us,
Yes.
and that there is magic and love and joy and learning in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just this morning, well, an hour ago, before we met online, I was thinking of that. What you brought up about the phenomenon of the how Israel, the Israelis, are still tremendously focused on October 7th,
Right.
which was 2 years ago. Over 2 years, actually. No,
Almost two,
not
almost
quite.
2 years,
Almost two
almost
years,
two
yeah.
years. Yeah.
And show little empathy, it would seem, the majority of the population there. I mean, there's
Right.
a lot of
Right.
exceptions, of course, but
Sure
to
there is.
the intensity and the suffering of the Gazans. So I was wondering, I'm a stats freak. I've always loved to play with numbers. I was thinking there are many estimates of how many Gazans have been killed, during this, everything from 65,000 up to 500,000. But let's say it's 10 times or 100 times more than the number of Israelis that were killed on October 7th. So
Right.
120,000,
Right.
including, lots of people that are still under the rubble and so on. Um, so I was thinking that what happened, not only hundreds of years of persecution of Jews and being endless pilgrims from one place to another, having their villages burnt and so on, and then with the supreme sacrifice, if you call it, of the Holocaust, that even though many Jewish people in this part of the world have gone for psychotherapy to heal intergenerational trauma, which lives in the grandchildren and so on, of Holocaust survivors and victims, still a lot of the trauma has not been healed. So I'm wondering if the trauma that gets triggered so quickly when there's an incident of anti-Semitism or a big one like October 7th, that maybe the trauma is 100 times more intense. That,
Hmm.
of course, the Palestinians have been traumatized through the Nakba and so on, but not as long and as intensely as the Jewish people. Not to compare, of
Mm,
course, tit for tat,
sure.
but just as maybe one way of understanding the extreme sensitivity of the psyche of the Jewish people, not only in Israel, but in the diaspora as well, that it doesn't take much for that fear to come to the surface. It's just residing there all the time.
I don't think there's any doubt. Talk a lot about that, write a lot about that.
Mhm.
But I don't want us to rest here.
Mhm.
I don't want us to stay here
Yeah.
because it is not prophetic. There is no written law that one will always be a victim because they have been a victim.
Yeah.
And the truth is, we have, as Jews, a tremendous amount of systemic and political power to change the reality that we had always experienced. My greatest fear and challenge, probably in doing this work every day, is that we actually call them in our book bad actors, BADD, people who blame, attack, demonize, and dismiss the other. And it is necessary for these actors to keep us in our victim shell, to never know or understand a Palestinian, to feel under constant assault, because then you have to have Israel as a Jewish majority state. And I would offer to you and your audience that I believe deeply that the only permanent pathway to Jewish safety is through Palestinian rights and safety. It may seem, romanticized and feel good that we somehow are going to beat back this constant threat and we're going to win. No, we're not, because you cannot defeat righteous resistance. Um, what happened on October 7th is not righteous resistance, but there is a great deal of righteous resistance in the Palestinian movement.
Yeah.
And the horrific events of the last 2 years, just thinking from sheer pragmatism,
Mhm.
how would you expect a people who have suffered in the way the Palestinians, particularly Gazans, and the West Bank, which has increased hundredfold in violence in
Yes.
the last 2 years,
Yes.
how would you expect them now to feel more eager to sit with their
Yeah.
Jewish brothers and sisters
Yeah. No,
in
I,
peace?
I totally understand what you're
So
saying.
I think that we're living. I guess I want to take the opportunity to
Mhm.
encourage anyone who listens to don't be lulled into this sort of fantastical coma that we can kill our way out of the circumstances of today. We can only learn, listen, love, and understand our way out of them. We cannot kill our way out of them.
So the way that people who express sympathy for the Palestinians, for their human rights and safety and
Right.
so on, are branded by many segments of the Israeli population as pro-Hamas.
Right.
So is that, if we were to say, well, maybe that partly comes from that extreme trauma that is a reaction, like an instinctive emotional
Right.
reaction. So understandable, maybe. Or is it political manipulation of using anti-Semitism as a weapon?
Right. Well, I think both are true.
Okay.
In our experience, students that we have talked to, hundreds of,
Mm,
who are labeled as pro-Hamas are not. That's simply a falsehood, propagated to demonize, dismiss, and not listen to the criticisms. Are there, on both sides, are there extremes that have zero tolerance for the other? Who, in some, it's certainly, particularly immediately after October 7th, made statements that could absolutely be seen as glorifying the violence of October 7th, as we have seen in the last week with the death of Charlie Kirk, with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It is a human instinct to feel release when the person whose foot has been on your neck gets
mm,
punched. And rather than be able to deal with that very natural human reaction, we have placed it as evil because it is much easier for us to follow something kind of built into our societal zeitgeist, which is that the Jewish community in general is like us and part of us, and Palestinians are the brown Muslim scary other. This
mhm.
is not a conscious thought for most. This is subliminal. This is intolerance that is built in. Um, and therefore, these narratives that were already there have really been heightened. So I want to really say that, are there people who are pro-Hamas, who have been protesting on the street? Of course there are. Are there
Sure.
people who say horrible things like Jews go back to Poland, or say the river to the sea and mean Jews go into the sea?
Mhm.
These are not the people that we have talked with. The students who have written very powerful and not always delicately worded letters, who hold placards that can be read as quite offensive, when we listen to their hearts, their anger and upset is the treatment of the Palestinian people, not hatred towards Jews. And I know that Jews that some Jews that may listen to this will say, "You're smoking something,
Yeah.
Dr. Wilkinson. You're
Right.
you're drinking the Kool-Aid. You don't know what you're talking about." I can only share with you that I have talked to a lot more Palestinians than likely anyone who listens to this
Yeah.
podcast.
Well, good for
And
you.
it has not been my experience that they are driven by animosity towards Jews.
Right. Yeah.
You'll hear Raja say in every single one of our talks that he
Mhm.
has absolutely no difficulty with Jewish self-determination. It's just that it was determined in his bedroom. And this is what we've been unable to cope with.
So I'm interested to know on a personal level,
Sure.
like a lot of people who are very, very upset about what Israel is doing in Gaza right now, and in the greater Israel area, should we call it, among the
Sure.
neighboring states as well. Um, a lot of people say, well, I love the Jewish people. They're fine, just like anybody else. It's
Right.
Zionism that I have a
Right.
problem with. So I'm not anti-Semitic, but
Right.
I'm anti-Zionist. So,
Wonderful.
what's your take on that?
Well, sure. Well, let me give perhaps a couple of things that we can hang on. Okay.
Okay.
Because you used the word Zionism. You
Yeah.
didn't say Zionist.
Huh.
So to be against Zionism is to be against a political project that has created a system of inequality
Yes.
where rights are afforded more to one group than to another group. A Zionist, a person who says I am a Zionist, means many different things by it. Many people who identify as Zionists are deeply concerned with Palestinian human rights.
Right.
So I would say to people, if you are critical of Zionism as a political project, that is never anti-Semitic. If you then demonize a person who identifies as Zionist and blame them for the actions of the state of Israel, that is anti-Semitic.
Okay.
So I can only speak the way I speak by speaking with intellectual honesty and integrity. So in my experience, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism need to be kept in two separate baskets.
That's a
And
beautiful and important distinction,
right.
to
And
start to.
are there times when there is intersection? Yes, there are. But
Right.
in my experience, they're a very small minority of the overall expressions of anti-Zionism.
Mm,
Um, and I encourage you, your audience, young people especially, tell people what you're for. Don't tell them what you're against. I don't use terms like anti-racism or anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism or anti-Palestinian racism. I tell people what I'm for. I'm for the equal life and dignity of every human.
yes.
I'm for the ability for every human on this earth to be together. I look at the Holocaust as never again for everyone, not just for me or for my people. So tell people what you're for. That will give you a lot more credence rather than telling them what you're against.
Yes. And it might help us also once we have that invitation to express our longing and our desire and our vision, then to find the common ground between us and all sides.
Sure.
I wrote a little poem on New Year's Day this year, and I took that expression from the river to the sea and tried to upend it. And I can't remember the whole thing, but it starts out from the river to the sea, may all Arabs and Jews be free. And then it goes on and on like that.
Right.
Because these little phrases, which most people have used in a positive way, they become so identified with the politics and the division that
Right.
it becomes like a bomb. And there's so many areas that we can't approach, so many things we can't say. So I like what you're suggesting is let's focus on what we can say that's positive, and even rather than seeing the faults in another, even on an interpersonal level, let's look at
Right.
their qualities and virtues and praise them. That'll help those qualities to grow and maybe the faults to
Right.
dim in the shadow.
Right.
So along
Right.
that line, when it comes to authentic dialogue, which is a special love of mine, what kind of mediators do you believe could be trusted enough to
Mm.
engage both Jews, Palestinians, and others, the
Right.
world? It's a world situation.
Wow. Well, it's very interesting. So let's do some distinguishing. So
Okay.
the what we call transformational conversations, which is a form of dialogue we do here,
Hmm.
is about how Jews and Palestinians relate to each other here.
In North
So
America, you mean?
in North America.
Okay.
Then there's another part about a larger process, which is often related as peace or some type of creating a long-lasting, sustainable system of coexistence. Um, we spoke this summer at the Stratford Festival on a panel on the Oslo Accords, and one of our colleagues who was on the panel with Raj and I, there were four of us all together. It's available in a podcast from CBC Ideas if people want to listen.
Oh, great.
It's a five-part series called Inventing Peace.
Okay.
It covers different peace initiatives and how they succeeded or failed. Um, anyway, what she suggested that I've thought a lot about was that the more honest brokers are ones who have lived it, like Northern Ireland,
Mm,
like South Africa, um,
yeah.
Bosnia, perhaps not the best example because it is is a negative peace in general that has been sustained in Bosnia. It's a cessation of violence, but not necessarily by keeping people apart, not by bringing them together.
Even
Canada,
French and English in Canada, even we've
sure, and
come a long
Canada,
way.
we talk about Canada as being a potential, but maybe would have observer status because we got a lot of our own crap to still work through.
Yeah,
But I think that Canada could have a role to play.
right.
Um, the real challenge with Europe, the UK, and the US is that they have deep economic interests
Mm,
and geopolitical interests in how it is resolved, military interests.
yeah,
And as you know very well clearly from the work you do, that a true intermediary only has the best interest of the people they are intermediating with. But when you have a broker that has a predetermined desired outcome that benefits them, I don't see how they could be a good arbiter.
right. That makes sense. Sure. And it's hard to find a nation, in the politics of real politic, as it's called,
Right. Yeah.
the K at the end.
Yes.
Every nation is trying to get whatever it can,
Right.
regardless of the its neighbors, and so it's really hard to find a state
Right.
or even a non-state actor. Even NGOs have their agendas.
Sure they do.
Um,
I mean, there's always deeper conversations, Hugh. You know, there's the conversation of nationalism.
yeah.
Um, the primary solution of division or partition has always been about having two separate states, a Jewish and a Palestinian state.
Mhm.
So if nation states are central to our problem, is creating yet another nation state a solution to that
Mhm.
problem? Or is it creating a solution where everyone in the land has equal rights under some form of confederation or some form of alliance?
Exactly.
Uh, so I mean, we, we've written articles about it. We're very public about our concerns of the promise of a two-state solution, not because it's a bad thing or that we don't think it might be an intermediary step, but because the two-state solution so far is talked about like thoughts and prayers in gun control in the US. It's because the people who talk about it don't actually offer what they're willing to give up to create that new state. So it's an empty promise. And I know why it's so dear to most in my community because the alternative, is a binational or one state that they feel quite understandably the long-term demographics would not be in our favor. And it's a deep and understanding fear. I have very close friends who say to me, every single time we've left it up to other people, it did not go well for us. So this is a root fear that's built into Zionism, and it's understandable and it's reasonable. But partition has never worked. I don't know any reason why now it would work.
Yeah.
If you could make it work and make it just, go for it. We don't have a particular stake in what the solution is. Our stake is that it's spoken about in a way, in a meaning of justice and truth and reconciliation. That for many in all parts of the global South, the word peace is a Western indoctrination of influencing struggles to make them easier for us.
Mhm.
So would really like to reframe the conversation into a conversation of reconciliation, justice, truth, belonging,
Yes.
cooperation, community building,
All
um,
healing words.
healing words, because there is a giant chasm that needs to be repaired. And I don't know how building a taller fence creates repair.
Mhm. Well, my vision, regardless of how feasible it is now or in the future, is a single state, if you will, or
Right.
entity. I've even created a name for it, which borrows 5 letters from both Palestine and Israel. Palesrael. And it would be an entity or a state where, like a civic society, like Canada, where everyone has equal rights before the law, regardless of religion, ethnicity, or whatever, and that if necessary, there would be an international force from the United Nations or however that might come about that would stay there for a generation or two, as long as it takes to keep people from
Right,
demolishing each other because of the
right,
lack of trust and the trauma and the
right.
history, but just to have a peacekeeping force stationed there. And even if it has to be 50,000 people or soldiers or more,
Mhm.
it's worth it because, like I said, it's not just that little tiny shred of land. It's a world
Right,
situation and a
right.
kind of a planetary archetypal conflict that we need
It
to
is.
resolve as a
It,
community of nations.
I think you're right, and I think it's indicative of a larger polarization that has happened in the world.
Yeah.
That Israel-Palestine, in a sense, has become a metaphor
Hmm.
for our differences.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it is much bigger and more important than a regional conflict.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, this is our audiences who are neither Jewish or Palestinian sometimes. Their main curiosity is how did this end up in my living room? On my college campus, in my political debates.
Right.
And, there's lots of very good reasons why it has. Um, yeah,
So there's something for us all to learn,
yeah.
and also we can become participants. So a lot of people, we have to finish off soon.
Yes,
Although we
please,
could
let's
talk for
wrap up.
hours. I'm
No,
just loving
I'm
this conversation.
okay. Thank you,
Yeah.
Hugh.
Um, so for someone who sees it happening, we can look at our phone, see what's
Right,
unfolding, but yet feels impotent
right,
and but wants to do something to help the process that you're
right,
talking about, call it
right,
peace or something else,
right.
unity, justice, understanding, dialogue. What would you suggest? A Torontonian or a
Sure,
Guelphite
sure.
to
Well,
do?
I mean, our first answer is always one that some may feel as unsatisfying, but I believe in it, and that is talk to somebody you don't know, whose story you haven't heard, and learn from them. If you're Jewish, talk to Palestinian. If you're Palestinian, talk to a Jew. Learn to see the other as individual rather than as group.
The human being.
Secondly, get aligned with groups like Standing Together, Friends of Standing Together in Canada, and others that are working together, advocating our government on Israel-Palestine policy,
Yeah.
writing to your MP, um, making statements of value. Is selling arms, for example, to Israel in line with our Canadian values, supposed Canadian values? Um, this is certainly a step you can take. The other step is when you hear someone say something that you know is wrong, create enough of a relationship with them that you can challenge them on it. Because a lot of what we hear, particularly in social media, is some subverted concept of an individual truth that becomes fact.
Mhm.
Um, our Probably our greatest challenge right now today in Canada and certainly in the US is the growing polarization, bifurcation of communities. This does two things. It leaves space for authoritarian regimes because if the people are so divided that they can't come together, they have no joint force to defeat authoritarianism. Secondly, it is eating away like a cancer at our discourse. It is seeing other different opinions as dangerous. Um, this is our language, the use of words like radical,
Yeah.
um, the need to talk apocalyptically about the other.
Mhm.
If so and so gets into office, that's the end of the world. we must begin to alter our language. We must speak in terms that are human,
Mhm.
kind, and reflective of our values. Um, Find whatever avenue you have, whether it's spirituality, a particular faith, uh, a an understanding, an academic understanding. Use whatever avenue you have to build partnerships and coalitions.
Mhm.
Don't let those who want to keep us apart win.
Wonderful. So just to finish, I'm going to ask you if you can, if you would,
Okay.
imagine that there is a group of 15 or 50, say, or 100, whatever, um, Jewish citizens of North America, we'll say, who are in Canada, the Jewish community is a little on the conservative side, perhaps, but they're listening to what you're saying, but they're wary.
Right.
If you were to speak to them from your heart in that human
Yes.
way, what would you say briefly to sort
Uh,
of assuage their fears or
you know,
help
th
them to take a
thank
little step?
thank you for that invitation. That's very important.
Mm.
Your feelings and your trauma are genuine and real. They are to be acknowledged and cared about. They're not to be excused. They're not to be reasoned or rationed away. The suffering you have had, the losses we have had are real and powerful. I
Wow,
hear you. I hear you. And I sit with you. And I ask you to imagine that the suffering of the other is experienced in a very similar, if not identical way. And can you find it in your heart to show compassion for someone else who suffers in the way that you have suffered?
that was beautiful, very authentic. I felt you were talking right to me. I almost converted to Judaism there just because I felt so included, and
Right.
that was beautiful. And now, if you were to say something to the similar number of Palestinian or Arab
Yeah.
people, it might be similar, but maybe slightly different.
Well, so absolutely, I will. I want to be clear that in our work, Raja speaks to
Yes.
what he thinks his community needs to do differently. What I will say to the Palestinian community is know a Jew as an individual, not as a collective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have a meal, talk, share a game that you both like, find out what shows you watch.
Yeah.
Um, Resist the normative assumption that a community is a monolith. So I would say to you that you may be able to do that and still not give up anything as a Palestinian. And right now, you might not be able to.
Yeah.
And I accept and honor and respect that.
Nice.
That
Yeah.
right now, you might not be able to because you're in too much pain.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Because a lot is expected of one, and sometimes it's just to acknowledge the
Right.
limitations is a first step. Well, I
Absolutely.
read in a little bit of your bio on one of the websites, sort of boning up for the interview.
Right.
You said that, or I think it was you that said, maybe in the Anglican
Right.
newsletter, you said
Right.
that, beyond our work together and our co-authoring, Raj and I are friends and who both like hummus and to
Right.
have an occasional beverage together.
Right. And I can't overstate this. Raj and I did what we did by literally sitting around food and occasional beverage, just listening for probably a year before we wrote a word. Raja is my brother. Um, what our values that we share um, not only are more important, but obliterate the tribal differences between us. They simply have come not to matter.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There, it sort of brings it full circle around to the common ground, the humanity, and the roots.
Right,
And when we can transcend all the tit for rat a tat tat, who did what and said what to whom and when, it's an endless conversation, argument that will never end, but to look at our common ground and our common humanity and our desire for the safety of our children, our grandchildren, ourselves, that can inform the process.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was really
Thank you.
wonderful. And
Thank
maybe
you.
we'll
And
continue.
I know you'll love the conversation with Raja, and then maybe you'll figure out what we need to talk about together at another time.
Right on. I look
Thank you
forward
so
to
much.
talking with Raja at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and I'll
Wonderful.
probably post the two videos
Lovely.
maybe one day after the other. So part one and part two.
Thank you. Just let
So
us know when you post them. We'd appreciate it.
thank you so much. Shukran and shalom.
Uh, Toda rabah, bavakasha. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.